Okay, I'm live. I'm just sending the link over to Will, and he'll be joining us shortly. So just give a couple minutes for that. In the meantime, if you folks aren't already familiar, I would just recommend that you do go and check out the Free State Project. You can find that at fsp.org. And if you're in New Brunswick or in Canada anywhere, you could also check out the New Brunswick province free province project, which is at nbfree.ca. So we got two of them here. We got one down in the U.S. and actually, I guess New Hampshire is actually not that far away from New Brunswick. And there's quite a few similarities actually. If you New Hampshire and New Brunswick, they're basically spots that you could find if you cross the pond to England. Much different over here in the new lands. But we're hoping to actually expand on that, actually. Bring bring freedom, bring liberty into the 21st century would be a great thing. And I think we got some pretty darn good folks that I'm going to be talking to over the next little while. Some of the folks from the Free State Project that already have some real world experience on this and maybe get some pointers and some advice along the way. Just going to check and make sure that link did go out there. One sec, folks. Just 1 second. Trying to send the link to my iPad. Can you email to? Oh, okay. All right. We'll try that then. Okay. Just got to send it by email here. So just 1 sec, folks. Compose to. Okay. And then we'll just call it the link. All right. Just give me 1 second there, folks. I'm going to send the link through email. So we'll just take another second here. All right. I think we should be good now. Sent. Sent. Let me just double check here. Oh, by the way, actually, I'll bring something else up actually while we're waiting. Not sure if you folks are familiar with this or not, but I just got this notification. I would imagine you folks already know, or most of you folks that watch my live streams would already know that I have Starlink. Because yeah, in Canada, if I was waiting for any real competition or competitors to the status quo up here to give me a high speed internet, I'd be waiting a long time. But thankfully, Elon Musk, SpaceX, and their company Starlink has offered something for us Canadians, and it's working a great, way better internet connection than what I used to. And actually, it turns out that you can now, for a limited time, if you're interested in getting Starlink, when I bought mine, I believe it was just under $700 for the kit. I think it was $499 American at the time, but you can actually get even more upgraded version, a new kit for it's a limited time thing. I don't know how long they're going to have it, but for $350. So if you're looking to get Starlink or you've been contemplating it, well, and if you're in Canada, now would be the time because I got to tell you, for $350 for the new upgraded version, that is a heck of a deal. That's a smoking deal as far as I'm concerned. And I would definitely highly recommend it. Because believe me, as a Canadian myself, I know how difficult, especially if you live in anywhere rural or in the outskirts of the suburbs, even, right? I mean, some places in this country still in 2023 gets terrible. Not just actually internet, but cell phone connection as well. But I won't even worry about going down that particular road. I could spend an entire live stream just talking about the massive failure and the absolute lack of competition in terms of telecommunications in this country. And once again, that's who's squarely to blame. Who's at the heart of it, the root cause? Well, government, of course. That's usually you can pretty much guarantee that government's going to be sure. Corporations are involved. There's lobbying, all that stuff, but at the end of the day, who's got the big gigantic gun in the room? Who sets the rules, right? Well, yeah, it's government. So if you look out there on the landscape, there's a massive lack of competition. Well, it sure as hell isn't because of the fact that there is an actual lack of competition, as we know, based on our neighbors to the south. Anyways, I do believe that Will is getting ready to join us here. So just give me 1 sec here, folks. I'm gonna bring him onto the stream. Hello, Will. How you doing?
Hey, Bennett. How you doing?
Excellent. Doing great. Doing great. Been looking forward to chatting with you. Actually, there's a couple of you folks. So are you from the New Hampshire Free State Project, or are you just someone that's interested in it?
Well, I'm in New Brunswick. I'm sort of with, I'm getting into the Free Province Project, but I've also been followed.
Okay.
Yeah, I followed you for a while, actually.
Right. Excellent.
And yeah, I've been following Free State Project in New Hampshire before Mark started the Free Province Project. He took the initiative to get that going.
Right on. Yeah, and actually, I'm really happy he did because that's something that definitely is. It's always kind of been at the back of my mind. I just, I wasn't even aware of the fact that there was anyone else even considering this. But that's I guess that's one of the beautiful things about the internet, because when I think back, you take 30 years ago in the way we had in terms of communications, I might have gone the rest of my life. I've never even heard about Mark, right? So it is great that we do have these abilities to communicate with each other, because this is something I think it's really important, and it's kind of along the lines of the message I've been trying to hammer home for the last few years at least, which is, it kind of fits in what I recognize. I'm sure you're familiar with Jordan Peterson, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so it kind of fits in with that whole thing, and even though Jordan Peterson, I wouldn't suggest is a libertarian per se, right? But I do like the message that he was sending, and of course you got a lot of people who've listened to him. The man is like popular beyond belief, right? And especially for a Canadian, it's quite exceptional. He didn't even actually. I think he's one of the few Canadians that didn't actually have to go to the U.S. to achieve his notoriety or success. But I like the idea of the personal responsibility, the picking yourself up by the bootstrap, the fact that, we've all gone through, well, we can all both be oppressors and victims, on both sides. But the main thing is, what do? Do you sit around and be miserable and stew in these things, or do you just look for ways to function outside the system? Because that's something I've actually thought about is like things even like cryptocurrencies. You don't have to tear down the US or the Canadian dollar. You just build something alongside of it, right? That would actually be something that's done through a voluntary means and shows people, even status, that here's a way where you can do these things that you do, where the state's involved, which fucks things up an awful lot here. But here you don't have that thing to concern. Now, of course, the whole Bitcoin thing, I didn't get too heavy into it. But that's just neither here nor there in terms of the current. To me, at the end of the day, it's at least finding ways to try to function alongside the system without having to be labeled as people that are just trying to tear things down. And I love the idea of the Free State Project and how they're going about it. So if you want to even just take a couple minutes and kind of explain what interested you in the obviously the Free Province Project, but I mean, as a fellow New Brunswicker, I'm sure I probably don't have to say too much, but just what's been your personal experiences and what has kind of brought or led you to the NB Free Project?
Yeah, I guess it's I try to look back at my progression. I wouldn't even say I was libertarian earlier on. Like, I grew up Christian, Catholic, and then in Ontario, I was from, basically liberal, centrist. At the time, liberals were, fiscally somewhat responsible and sort of, right. And I wasn't political really, at the time either, but just grew up in that environment where I would say I probably had a liberal bent to myself. But
yeah,
and I'm an engineer by trade. Like, politics is like dealing with human like psychology and all the insanity of and the money and the power and stuff. So like, it's not generally, I'm surprised I pay so much attention now to politics. Like, I'm almost, maybe as you get older, but basically conservatives, I had some issues for a variety of reasons where I said I wouldn't necessarily see myself as conservative. And then as I looked into philosophy and ideology, like I started looking at Ayn Rand, like she's got objectivism. She kind of derived, it's very interesting. people don't really appreciate, I don't think, the philosophical power. Like, so I tried to understand how she fits into all the philosophers, but basically
Mm,
capitalism and all that was even derived from the fact that we're an individual and we need to pursue our own life. And in
yeah,
order to do that, you have to think, and that means free speech, and that means free trade with other people. So it was really interesting because it was actually derived like in a scientific way. And
yeah,
so I started looking at libertarianism, but in the last little while, I even started looking at like anarcho-capitalism and voluntarism, sort
yeah,
of,
yeah,
because Ayn Rand thinks that you need like a basic government, which would be like military, legal court system, and say, basically protecting your rights, let's say,
yeah.
as the basic. So before I go further, do you agree with that we need a basic small government for those rights, or would you go further than that?
No, but see, that's the thing. That's the thing, and you kind of understand, and that's the beautiful thing about learning all this thing. And I'm glad that you mentioned you have an engineering background in Christianity, because now I don't have an engineering background, but I've built engines since I was a teenager. So kind of along the same lines, and problem solving, real world problem solving is massively important. And when I get to an area in my mind where there's some barrier to figure this stuff out, that's when it drives me nuts. I got to figure this stuff out. And that's the thing with libertarianism. And I'm not sure if you've heard this even. When I first heard about it, which was probably 2008, Ron Paul, when he was making his run for president in the U.S., created quite a stir. YouTube was getting quite popular then. You could find videos constantly. And you learn about the libertarian, like in terms of the minarchist libertarian. That's the first thing, which is, the night watchman state, which is basically along the same lines as Ayn Rand's objectivism, her philosophy. It's grounded in that. And if you think about it, it's something to help explain to a state, and to kind of alleviate their concerns, right? The problem is, if you and be someone with an engineer in mind like yourself, what you get to is you're still leaving out that major piece of the puzzle. So you're still going to allow certain people in society to have this authority that no other human being possesses, which is to, use preemptive uses of force or violence or threats thereof, right? Or coercion or theft as a means to an end. That's where me and minarchists and objectivists seem to divide, because to me, and it's taken me years to figure this out. And really what it is at the end of the day, I don't have anything against a minarchist or an objectivist. I would just suggest that there seems to be a little bit of meekness involved, where that they don't have the courage to just acknowledge the fact that you don't. What it is they're looking for a protector or a final arbiter, right? And I suppose with someone like yourself and people like myself with that background of Christianity, I never grew up believing at any point in time that the state or anyone in government was the ultimate authority, right? Now, I did have a lot of arguments and disagreements with religious figures over the years, because I found a lot of contradictions in the way the Bible was taught too, as well, right? But that was always the thing that came back to me is clarity of mind. Clarity of language is what gives me clarity of mind. So when people are talking about these things and using these terms, I want to know the definitions. And the reason why we can actually have conversations is because most of the time we agree, or in the past, or somehow have come to an agreed upon term, a proper or a way of describing the terms and the words that we use. That's what the dictionary is for. But the problem today is when people are using these words, whether you're talking about as a minarchist or a voluntarist or an anarcho-capitalist, is it does leave people very confused. And to me, the most important thing we can do for human beings, for our fellow other humans, is just explain to them. And then, surface level is freedom, really liberty. It's basically starts as a state of mind. And if you're that far removed from even understanding what it is to be genuinely a free human being, then there's the work that's involved. And I say, I get it. You can explain minarchism and it makes sense, the night watchman state, and it did work and function for a while. But I would suggest that if we're going to go through basically what I've coined, the Enlightenment era 2.0, well, let's skip past all the mysticism. Let's skip past all the subjective aspects of these philosophical concepts and principles, and let's get right down to the objective core of these things, which is, what is it? What does it mean to be a free human being? And that's where the voluntarists, the true anarchists, right, and the libertarians, the philosophical libertarians like myself, seem to be the ones that have fully grasped it and embraced it, and aren't scared of the fact that if I tell other people that you should be free and this is what it means to be free, and you can figure this out on your own. You don't have to rely on me. Say you run this stuff through your head, right? And you'll figure it out on your own. That I'm not fearful of what people will do with their freedoms. That to me, I'm fearful of what people are doing under the auspices or the pretense of these ideologies, right? Or these cult-like concepts that have been drilled into our minds since kids. And we see it. I see people every day that normally outside of the state, without that kind of indoctrination, they would genuinely, mostly peaceful, decent people. But you introduce this statism, this cult-like mindset into these people. And like I said, it's hammered into us very early on. Well, that's where it turns a lot of people and that's why the growth of the state now has more and more people at odds with each other. And that's why I think this divide is so much bigger and getting so much larger on a regular basis, is because people recognize, even if they don't understand it intrinsically, government is force. So whoever's got force, if they're not on your team, well, you're scared to death of the opponent. Well, as a libertarian or as someone that, has those Christian upbringing, and I don't seek to cause harm to my fellow man or woman, is I want those people to understand that freedom has to be the basis for your engagements, whether they're social or economic, and that's the only path forward for humanity. So anyway, that's just that. I know that was kind of a long-winded thing, but that's kind of my thoughts on the whole libertarian objective and the philosophy.
Yeah, I'm interested to learn about your specific when we get into certain areas. So that's helpful, because there's a lot of disagreement within the libertarian and those types of
Sure.
ideologies within them. So, and that's part of the issue is, there's not cohesiveness in that sense, but I'm willing to, when you talked about.
Hey, Will, before you go on there real quick, can you, maybe it's if you turn your mic down a little bit? It seems like I'm getting crackling.
Oh.
Or it might be rubbing on something, maybe. I don't know, but I'm just hearing some, a lot of crackling in the background.
Okay. Yeah. I'll see if I can avoid it rubbing on my shirt.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, there's a lot that you were saying. It made me trigger different ideas that I wanted to mention. But so, for example, the fact that Canadians are watching CBC and CTV and getting kind of brainwashed, plus the schooling system. So you've got the majority of people that buy into whatever, the propaganda is. And so, these kind of concepts are pretty foreign. So certain, when I look at the world, like you said, it was really interesting when you mentioned problem solving.
Well, I'm really sorry to interrupt you again, man, but that is it is that I don't know, maybe it's the volume is set too high and it's kind of clipping itself.
Let's see. I don't know if this is the volume for the mic, or I can use just the built-in. How's it now? Is it still crackling, or?
Yeah, no, it's still crackling.
Okay, let me try just the regular mic.
Okay.
Hopefully I can.
Yeah.
All right, see if you can. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
So, and this ties into the free province and the free state, is that the majority of people are watching CBC, CTV, MSNBC, CNN, all that stuff, and education. So they're basically, too far gone in a sense. The odd person's going to get into this, but as an engineer or just a person problem solving who was more into tech and not into politics and human psychology and what's going on, I kind of looked at a lot of things in society and questioned it, just naturally. Like when I was in Calgary, I used to drive downtown to work, and I'd be like, why are we all commuting, sitting in rush hour? And people are like, oh, you just have to accept it and sort of be in the present moment and not get all stressed out and angry and road rage. But I'd be like, no, this is wrong. Like, why are we all driving to one central place downtown, and then we all drive back to our suburbs and everything? So I started working remotely, and then I came out to New Brunswick, and I was able to, continue that. It's not easy to get, at the time, it wasn't easy to get contracts that allowed remote work. But so I guess I did have a history of somewhat questioning things. So when I looked at what was going on in politics, I'm like, well, how can we do this differently? So I know you've talked about freedom of association and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. For me, it's also like you get sick of the arguments and you don't want to have to convince everybody. So let's just do different things. And that's where national divorce and individual provinces that have more control, and you can move around to some area that sort of agrees with, your philosophy, because I'm not going to convince certain people on the left, like, if they want full socialized healthcare, public government monopoly or whatever, then go for it. You have your area and I have my, that's the ideal scenario for me. Is like, when I started looking in this world, I'm just like, this is insane. Everybody's fighting. It used to be, you want 20% tax and I want 10% tax, and we can maybe compromise 15.
Right.
Those arguments, like, now we're back to, like, in my opinion, I used to look at this thing called Maslow hierarchy of needs, where you have your basic food, shelter, and at the very top is self-actualization. So I felt like I could read and learn things because all the other stuff has been satisfied. But now I feel like my base level is threatened. Like, my bank account might get frozen. The inflation, the value of my dollar, my savings, all sorts of things at a basic level. Even being able to travel or go in a restaurant or go in a grocery store or fly, all those things are being threatened at a base level. So unfortunately, I feel like I've gotten sucked into this thing where I have to sort of get involved, where a lot of people ignore all this stuff, and it's slowly but surely. But like, if you looked at COVID, you saw that almost everybody went along with this and wanted you to be in a gulag, so to speak, or not to leave your house, or maybe even worse, taken out and put in a quarantine camp. And then they said, should you get healthcare? And so that's most of your fellow people, your fellow Canadians, right? So the Freedom Project or the Free Province and others, I'm looking at Alberta, I'm looking at New Hampshire, anywhere there's these Texas, anywhere there's some of this discussion, I'm open to other options. But the idea is that there's only going to be so many people who understand the libertarian aspects, and sort of it's better to get them to coalesce in one central or one place.
Yeah, I definitely will, especially when it comes to that. And that's the thing. Are you familiar with the gentleman? His name's Stefan Molyneux?
Oh yeah, I saw your video recently about the enslavement.
Yeah. Actually, I started watching him many, 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 many years ago, back when he would basically he started an introduction to philosophy, went through all the great thinkers, and he has a lot of philosophical background himself. And he built up basically the most popular, largest philosophy show basically on the internet, until he stepped into it basically on a landmine in terms of, now it wasn't anything based on what he said, but he did cover the topic in terms of race and IQ. And that's like one of those third rails. And, got himself canceled pretty heavily, but I tell you, it's these philosophical ideas and understanding the fact, once you learn about some of these things, that this stuff, it's not even new. I mean, I read some of the books I read that were written in the 18th or 19th century, even some of the earliest 20th century stuff. And I quote all the time in sheer memes. I mean, this is actually the part that I think infuriates me the most, is that actually none of this stuff, if we actually went to school for if we actually got an education, which is actually teach your mind like how to think, not what to think, then I just can't. Well, that's why I believe even if you go all the way back to the days of Aristotle and Socrates and Plato, the only reason why they were even fans of democracy themselves is because they believed that the aristocrats, the upper echelons of society, were so well informed and educated that they did the things that were right, and they had some ethics and stuff to back them up. The problem is we're so far removed. When I'm listening to any conversation, especially in the political realm these days, we're so far away from any of these first principles. And that all I hear every day, all day in, day out, from all these people all the time that are supposed to be experts and high and mighty in academia, is just bickering over red or blue, the Leafs or the Maple or the Montreal Canadiens. Nobody is properly, and the people who are trying to actually enlighten the minds of the masses, because to me, that's, at the end of the day, that is what matters, is getting the people's minds up to at least the capacity to understand what it is to be a free human being. Because without that as your basis, without that as your foundation, well, like I say, it's just a free for all grab. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I thought you were putting I thought you would say,
no.
Yes, Okay, yeah. So that to me, anyways, that's my thought is, and if you can surround yourself, like you say, with people is in terms of the New Brunswick project or the New Hampshire project, I see how you're planting seeds in reality, right? So you're not just bringing people into your community, in your locality, or at least as close to you as possible, that are at least somewhat aligned with you, or at least have a live, let live mentality. Well, then you're talking about these people are going to be raised in communities, right? Where the bulk or the plurality of those people in those communities have that same live, and that's where your culture comes from. That to me, that's the big driver. And I've heard a lot of people saying, I've said it myself, the whole thing about politics is downstream of culture. It's like, yeah, but how do you shift your culture? Well, now later areas in your life, just like when I was growing up, movie, music, television, those things can be cultural drivers for sure. But it's definitely, when you're children, the kind of kids you're hanging out with, right? The kind of parents, the kind of figureheads in your community that are the leaders. Those are major drivers. And actually, it's when you're a kid, right? That's where your mind is being really formulated and molded to it. Now, it can be malleable when you get older. I'm proof of that, right? But not quite as readily and as easily as when you're a kid. So I think that to me is the big thing, because that's where you get not just the people, like even right now in the Free State, you get, let's say they get their full 20,000. But that 20,000, they're going to have kids, right? And those kids are going to have kids, and those kids are. So to me, that's the way you do it, and it requires, no revolution necessary, right? No need or necessity to lock and load and go through some stupid violent revolution where you could possibly end up on the other side of an even worse situation. More than likely not, but there's always that scenario. So to me, like I say, liberty starts as a state of mind, and the more people that you can surround yourself with at least that relative state of mind. And to me, I don't, whether you're a philosophical libertarian or you're a minarchist or an objectivist, like I say, I've used this thing before. We're walking down the street, and if you get 95% to the end where I want to get, well, I'm walking there with you. I'm more than happy to walk that, I might want to continue on to the rest of that 5% that maybe, but I'm fine to get to that, because once we at least get remotely close to that point, then I think if we're all at that 95% point, we can all recognize that maybe there is no reason to maintain this perception in our head where we need a ruler or a ruling class.
Yeah, I have a bunch of differences from people who are in this area, this space.
Right on.
And but depending on what the situation is, like even with this free province or free state, the idea, like I read this book called Sovereigntist Handbook. It's from Alberta, Corey Morgan.
Okay, yeah.
And it's about Alberta separation, but he said that before you can do that, you have to basically become self-reliant in terms of, like,
Yes.
if you cut off the federal pension plan for people, if you want your own provincial police, etc.
Mhm.
So before, I mean, not you don't necessarily have to secede or get into that, but one of the sort of, it helped to kind of think, well, we should get these certain things in order. He talked about Quebec being very, actually still interested in separation, and not just threatening it to get free stuff, but they actually want to get more, they want to be more confident that they can get a positive response vote. And so that was surprising, but I'm willing to work with people in different areas. And then the questions down the road, like, they might have a difference of opinion. Like when I mentioned my Christian or Catholic upbringing, I'm not that anymore. And I have differences obviously with Mark and other people. And like, I don't want to get into that area, but if you look at the Christianity and the stories that are told, there is a collectivism in that, in that philosophy as well.
Yeah, and altruism too, which is
right. Sacrificing yourself, like Jesus sacrificed himself. Yep. And you could ask why did he have to do that, and all that stuff. But the idea, doesn't really fit to me. In terms of the other thing is, there's an argument that says, there was Christianity and it was founded by Christianity, these countries, and now that people are atheists, they're going woke and that's their religion. Now I'm like, well, there's another option where you completely still stay rational, you don't have to go. It's not those two choices. Like that's a argument that a lot of people have made. Douglas Murray, all this stuff. Like once you get rid of religion and all that structure, it's woke leftism, and that's their ideology, religion. I'm like, that I don't agree with that. Maybe that's what the masses are going to do or whatever. But there's all sorts of issues where you had the Frankfurt School and all that progressive, stuff
Yeah.
come to postmodernism and all that in the education system for the last. So we're way behind. So the thing with the Free State Project in terms of New Hampshire, they're 10, 20 years ahead of us in terms of the other thing they did, which I kind of didn't think about until recently. They had this pledge that 20,000 people would sign up. Yep. And they didn't actually do anything until they got those 20,000. And then about 6,000 officially or so have moved there, maybe 10,000 unofficially. But, if you wanted to follow that, and I haven't talked about to this Mark, but like we're just, I'm just hashing it out right now. But if you wanted to mimic what they did, then you would say, okay, because he has a moving coordinator and people are, you want to try and get people to move here. But you could theoretically say, we're not going to do anything until we sign up whatever number that is. It doesn't have to be 10, 20,000, say, because our province is a lot less populated. But like what I was going to say with the morality aspect is that when I looked at evolution and human evolution and animals and stuff like that, I personally think that there's a lot of innate morality just because you want to, like, it doesn't make sense.
Self-preservation.
Yeah, you're not going to go around killing everybody. Like, so the idea that you have to believe like the 10 commandments and the fear-based morality, like if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell or whatever. To me, it's like a natural morality. And of course, some people violate that. But so like when we talk about rights, like nobody's going to agree that God, like if not everybody believes the same God, you're not all going to believe that you have God-given rights. You're not going to believe the government gives you those rights. So to me, like if you had different areas, like almost a contractual system in different areas, you would just agree if you live in that area, these are the, like, you know what I mean? Like if you're trying to argue that we have inherent rights, no one's ever going to totally agree that XYZ are, that those are the rights and either one, these other ones aren't your rights and stuff like that. So to me, it's not really worth debating. It's just like, if you had an area that had a jurisdiction that you agreed that you're going to do whatever, follow those guidelines, then you don't have to really get into that debate. I don't know how you feel about rights and sort of.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm with you. And trust me, you cannot offend me when it comes to anything as it pertains to Christianity or the government. Because like I say, I've worked through all this stuff over the years of my life, and nothing phases me in terms of that stuff. And actually, because I go into these things with actual good faith, and I just want to learn just like anyone else, and I don't have like a horse in the game or any other agenda other than I want to live in a free world and I want my kids to live in a free world. Is the religion thing, it kind of bothered me too, because and it took listening to someone like Ayn Rand. And I tell you, if my grandmother, God rest her soul, but if she had heard any of the things that Ayn Rand said, or that I had listened to her, Ayn Rand in any way, oh boy, talk about blasphemy. But I got to tell you, a lot of the things that the woman said, I had nothing in me. I mean, trust me, I tried everything in my arsenal to try to beat back her objectivist philosophy in some way, but because it sounds so intuitive almost for me, especially being raised in a religious family. And of course you're altruistic, right? Yeah, of course. But when Ayn Rand explains, it is a slave-like mentality. And that, like I say, whether you're talking about that from, the teachings of the Bible. And that's another thing I will point out, though, is usually when you're talking about the teachings from the Bible, it's usually interpreted by a fallible human being, I might add. So I went back and read the Bible myself again as an adult. And there are some areas in there where, actually, well, I will say, even with the whole thing with and I think that's why the New Testament, supplanted the Old Testament in terms of teachings, is with the Jesus and the crucifix and all that. Yeah. But at very least, there was one key thing that I think was really important, was free will. So that was really important, right? That was at least something that's like, okay, so we got free will. And even I had the hardest time so many times when I was arguing with some other people in the past, where they would bring up that phrase where it's said in the Bible where he says render unto Caesar. You've probably heard that expression, right? So Because, you know, as a libertarian, hey, taxation is theft. And I mean, that is just a real statement, whether people get shocked about it or not. Is none of us agreed that we just write this blank check social contract. And every time someone votes for a, you know, an increase in whatever tax or this or that, I just somehow I've just agreed to that. Right. But that's not the case. But actually, if you read that, what it really was said, if you read it and you properly interpret it, and I believe I did so. I don't have it right here with me, so I'd be just paraphrasing, but more or less it's along the lines of, given the situation where it's either that or, you know, Caesar right throws you in the dungeon or lobs off your head or something. I can see someone make the argument, hey, just render under Caesar what he's asking, your 10% or whatever. I can see it, but Jesus was not advocating for taxation. And that's the craziest part. I've heard people use that as an argument against Christians like myself with a Christian background, say, oh, no, don't you remember that? But that was a misnomer as well. But I do understand why there's a lot of pushback. And even in modern society, I do fear, even though I hear people like Jordan Peterson, but that's the thing about with someone like him coming out, and then even with your Sam Harris's and your Richard Dawkins and some of these atheist thinkers, is trying to get to the meta narratives and the stories of these things. Because yes, if you take some of the things, you know, written in any of these, like the Bible, totally, you know, literally, then yeah, you do end up basically with a slave-like mindset, even with the whole turning of the other cheek. I mean, how often, right, do you turn the other cheek? Right? And at some point in time, you got to defend yourself. So I'm totally on board with you there. And don't feel like in any way you got to constrain yourself in any way. Say whatever the heck is on your mind, because that's what I do. And like I say, I just work through it. And the way I go about it is because I'm just putting forth, you know, just good, honest arguments or statements. If you genuinely are curious like I am, then you won't get offended by the fact that, and I sure as heck won't by you pushing back against me, because I'll tell you, the only way I've actually got my mind up to the point where it is today is because I've had to allow myself to go through a whole lot of cognitive dissonance. There's a lot of very uncomfortable moments. A lot of the times I did it kind of in my own time, but where I've had to work through some stuff, and it can be humiliating, but it's also very fulfilling because like I say, I feel like I have so much more to learn, and there's a lot of open field out there for me to traverse. And I'm glad you're willing to come and have a conversation like this with me.
No, I appreciate
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me on to talk. And I noticed
No problem.
I think from what I sensed in your recent videos that, you know, we have to connect to each other, and not just in New Brunswick, but everywhere around the world. You know, I just saw a video with Tim Moen and this Russian libertarian. His name is Mikhail Svetov. And
right, I haven't seen that yet, but yeah, I'm going to watch that myself.
Yeah, it's really good. Okay. But he was against the local free state concept, and that was interesting. Like you said, I'm learning as well, and you're way ahead of me in terms of your education and experience with this topic, because I'm trying to power through a lot of stuff. But you know, I do think about these things, and I'm not, you know, 100% stuck on any particular ideology or whatever. But he was saying that we need to, like, I know Jordan Peterson's doing something similar to the World Economic Forum. I'm not saying that he's going to be the ideal messenger or message, but this guy, Mikhail, said that when in Russia, somebody had, you know, they all got labeled terrorists or whatever it was, and during the war, being against the war or whatever. And one guy, you know, somebody in Germany, like, libertarian, took him in, you know, the guy from Russia who left and stuff like that. So I like the idea that you're doing this, and sort of Tim Moen and like the idea with the free province thing is also connecting the pods. Like in New Brunswick, there's these, in other places, and in the States, they have freedom cells, but these pods are like people that maybe, like you said, a parallel system. They're exchanging food and other skills with each other outside of the system. So part of the thing that the moving coordinator is working on, I guess, is the pods, connecting those. And the free province is not necessarily political. They're not going to encourage, or they're not going to endorse a party or anything like that. Right. So it's a lot of disparate things. Maybe it's like an organizing thing to just point people in directions. And outside of that, you know, people can take up a healthcare initiative or some other type of initiative. But yeah, like I mean, in some ways I get confident in a certain viewpoint. But this guy, McCullough, he was against the local Free State because he said there's these global powers and money, and they're eventually going to get you no matter where you hide. So you need to compete at that global, not to say it's one global collective of libertarianism, but a network and a helping of each other. And so part of me, I'm open-minded to the Alberta thing, you know, the sovereignty, other places in the States, in other countries, you know, if it comes down to it, I want to share these ideas, what's working. Like one of my ideas was you have federal, provincial, and municipal is to get everybody freedom oriented to focus on whatever area. Like if they're in a certain riding, okay, let's contact the councillors and the mayor in that riding to do whatever, you know, to propose motions locally. And then you've got the provincial MLA situation, and sort of get people focused, you know. And then you've got the outside of the political sphere, like you mentioned, Bitcoin, gold, like the pods, the sort of farming, you know, getting food from people directly.
Yeah. Well, the food actually is a perfect example. I mean, this is and in New Brunswick, there's fertile ground here because this is actually one of the few provinces where you can buy some decent amount of property for not a huge amount of money. And when you consider the amount that produce has gone up in terms of inflation, this is a ripe time for people that want to get into farming and buy up some property in the province. And like I say, not only make yourself, you know, a nice, decent income that's quite self-sustaining, but you're also helping a tremendous amount of people in your community. I mean, I know myself, I grew up in New Brunswick. Now I lived in, my parents moved me up in Ontario. Early on, I was just turning 12 at the time, and I moved back here in my mid to late 20s and had my family here, or I had my family there, but moved them back here. But when I left here, so what would that have been? 81, 82. I remember even as a kid, each one of these communities were quite self-sustaining in terms of they all had major employers, maybe a couple of them, and they were much more vibrant communities. I've seen a lot of hollowing out of these communities, and I see where there's the potential. I mean, if it existed before in the past, you know, things have advanced in to the point now where I can't see how it's not possible to replicate it. Maybe not exactly, but to have some kind of local businesses and innovation that takes place, not just at like the core of downtown Toronto. There should be like there's great minds all over this province and people with some great work ethic, and especially in this province and these places where you can put some of that energy to really good use. And you don't even have to be constantly thinking about it every day. So if you're gardening and you're doing your business, right, you're not thinking about every day that you're doing this for liberty per se, because it's helping you. That's that beautiful thing about Ayn Rand and that kind of her kind of selfishness, right? Is that you're doing it for yourself and your family, but it's also the beautiful thing about that is it's also benefiting a tremendous amount of other people out there who want access to, you know, some vegetables and things that maybe aren't at these exorbitant costs that you have to pay at the grocery store. And because you can do things such as bartering or exchanging of you know, service and stuff, there are ways that you can do that in other ways that, once again, it saves, you know, you from having to hold on a bunch of fiat currency that's just constantly being devalued on a regular basis. And that's actually one of the major thing in terms of all of these projects. What I think is the biggest thing is the money aspect of it, because as long as the state controls, you know, the currency, that's the part that's really difficult. And even for those of us who you know, maybe don't necessarily want to function inside the system or even along or try to do things alongside or outside of it, is you're still, that's the thing with the state, is you're still compelled, you're still constantly being forced to prop it up through the monetary means. And even if you're not talking about in terms of actual taxation, well, because of inflation, well, that's a stealth tax. But I think the most devastating part of this, and I'm surprised that all these governments are, it's got to the point where it's Keynesianism on steroids. I'm not sure if you're familiar with John Maynard Keynes, the economist, but basically, and he didn't have any children of his own, but this thing, at least historically in the West, in the developed West, in countries like ours, there was at least the pretense that you pay off your debts before you pass off. Now it's just a constant rollover of constant increases in debts and deficits. So, you take like the baby boomer cohort, let's say, that the youngest of them now are up into their 60s, getting close into their 70s, let's say. And, a lot of them are passing away, or going to be passing. They're obviously not going to be paying off these debts which are actually continually to grow, not even stagnating, right? But you're offloading a lot of debt obligations and these deficits onto the unborn. And that to me is some of the most unspeakable things that societies have allowed. Is even if we play in their games of statism, even if I become a believer once again, well, wasn't the whole point is you don't economically enslave entire. What happened to taxation with at least the pretense of with representation? Well, if you're not alive, right, yet, well, you're not, and you're going to have to pay off these debts and deficits. Well, you weren't even informed. You weren't even alive to be told whether you want to agree with it or if you're going to be properly represented. So that to me is a major thing is the money. If we can figure out ways, and of course, the beautiful thing about that is don't underestimate the ingenuity of the human mind and people to adopt things, because I look through history, and there's been times, whether you're talking about in Netherlands, the tulips, right, or in England, what they used to use, the tally sticks, when humans are created with a situation or scenario where where the currency of choice that's being used, or that's the issuance of the state. Well, if that does break down, which looks like that is very real or potential, you don't have to necessarily worry about scrambling and make sure you got your Bitcoin, right? There are so many other ways, because in reality, what you're doing, what money truly is properly, money is a means to measure value, right? It's the measure. That's what you're doing with money. You're measuring the value of a product or of service, right? And it's also a means to exchange value. And the third thing that makes money actual money is it has to have a means to retain that value for future use. So if you don't want to use it today and you want to use it in a month, you should have some way. And that's where like things like gold and silver, and based on their properties and the way that they're easily divisible, and they were historically used, and gold in particular, for 5,000 years straight. So these are things that can be used, but also, once again, you also have agorism, barter, and just the fact that whatever, if you deem something of value, I like, as someone that's grown up in the country, there's a lot of times where I've wanted something, so someone else didn't have any cash on hand, but I had something that they deemed of value, and we just have to come to the conclusion is that value at least on par, right? So I'm not too overly concerned that humans can't figure this stuff out. The problem is if you got to scramble too quick and there's too many options available, and you don't know how that's going to work out. But that's why, to me, having these conversations is getting people up to speed, at least, like I say, understand things in terms of economics and what it is even to be a free human being. Once again, I don't know what people are going to do with this information, but at the very least, I think, or because I know based on my own experience, is I'm going to make better decisions if I'm at least better informed, or somewhat properly informed. So the more information that people like us can bring to people, and especially stuff that they haven't heard before, and is information that seemingly has been denied to them, that I think, like I say, if you can get enough people, it's not that I have faith in humanity or that I think humanity is terrible. To me, it's humans were, like I say, we could be good on one day or bad another day. We are definitely not. There's no such thing as everyone all good or everyone's all bad. It's a little bit of mix and match of everywhere in between. But like you were saying earlier on, what Austrian economists, right? What market capitalists, people understand is, and objectivists is, I'm not going to try to mold humans into being what I want them to be, right? I'm going to recognize humans for what they predominantly are. And we, just like with every animal in nature, the one thing that we do share is this striving for self-preservation. So anything that's conducive to allowing self-preservation while at the same time making our interactions voluntary, that to me, I don't care what label you put on it, that's a recipe for success as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's great points. Like society, like I mentioned earlier with the self-actualization, Maslow hierarchy of needs, we were able to subdivide tasks that needed to be done in society so people could focus and specialize on all sorts of things. But now that things are breaking down, like and threatening our basic survival, I've realized that I don't have certain skills, that are more valuable. Like gold is interesting. I'll talk about that in a second. Gold, silver, Bitcoin,
Right.
but other things like food, tools, the actual things you can eat, store some food in your house, being able to grow the food, being able to build a barn and all sorts of things like that.
Yep.
And so that's when I was talking about the pods. I noticed there's people that had skills that they were exchanging, and you start to think like, what can I, like, am I a plumber? Am I a construction guy? Can I grow a bunch of food and provide that, exchange that? And because everyone's like, in my case, I was in an office, or I was doing computer programming software stuff as my job. Like some people might think, well, you could educate if we have kids, maybe you can teach our kids math, homeschool stuff like that. I'm not sure what all the
Right.
skills are going to be that people want to exchange. Like if it's going to get a higher level than just basic, so say weaponry, food, can you protect people? Do you have a gun? Do you have knowledge of how to shoot the gun? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of hard to think about, because we could just pursue a very specialized area that had really, in this world today, like a tech thing or whatever. When you get back to the basics, then you got to think, what can I provide in exchange? But like gold, there's a lot of threats, like I mentioned earlier, to your basic survival. So like they confiscated gold in the past, and you could say, well, I'm going to bury it somewhere, and I'll just. But if you're not allowed to trade, if you're not allowed to use gold or silver with each other, like you say, for example, you can't, like if you want to go a little bit digital ID aspects, if you're not in that world and you can't participate, you don't want to participate in the surveillance and all that stuff, and you're thinking, well, I'm going to go on the side. Maybe you have to develop that network so that you can exchange the food. And what about medical stuff, medicine or prescription drugs, all that stuff? So you could say, like, I'm going to exchange gold. Like in New Hampshire, they have these gold-backed like currencies, like $1 that's actually got gold threading in the paper, in the currency, it's in the money. And so, and they accept that, and there's a bunch of stores, like you said, you're building that culture and network in that area. And then, but like the government could say, like, you can't use gold, you got to give it all in. And so you're going to be some of these, and most people probably do that. So there's going to be a certain number of people that are saying, no, I'm not going to do that. And then, like, to me, Bitcoin is really the only valuable current crypto. Like I've looked into Bitcoin and crypto quite a bit, and all the other ones are what they call proof of stake, where you can, like, if they're kind of centralized, you can put you can stake your crypto somewhere and get interest on it. But those are going to be deemed securities by the SEC in the States, basically. Right. And Bitcoin is the only thing that's like a commodity. It doesn't have a centralized company or any centralized founder or anything like that. And it uses proof of work, like, which is energy to secure the network. So in my mind, from at this point in time, but there's a lot of threats, governmental regulatory threats, where they're going to push for a CBDC, central bank digital currency. And they could outlaw, like they had a thing where they were trying to, in the States, say that anything other than CBDC is not a valid crypto. So that's where the black market situation. And I mean, I'd love if they would allow, like, if you diversified some of your money that's in the bank and you put it into gold, silver, Bitcoin, et cetera, have it on your own wallet. That's all great. There are still threats to that with government regulation, where you're only going to be able to use it to, in an illegal sense, with some people that you have maybe peer-to-peer with your cell phone, assuming that, that would function and stuff like that. So there's no, like, I feel threats on all these levels, and I don't have like 100% solution. Things you make you feel comfortable. If you have a bunch of food stores and you have water and et cetera, a network of people, I'm nowhere near what I need to be in terms of those things. But, hopefully that gives people, like, when the bank accounts got frozen, I had donated to the convoy.
Yeah. And
I thought, oh my God, because I have all my investments. I have a certain amount of investments in the bank.
Right.
And I thought, are they going to freeze my bank and my investments account? Like, what's going to happen? And so that's hopefully encourage people to not only have their money in different banks, but also outside of the banking system,
Yeah.
because they don't even have the money, as we see with this run on the bank. They only have a small percentage. That's with the fractional reserve. Like if you go to the bank and everybody asks for money, I mean, they don't have
Oh,
the money. So that's, people are getting more and more aware that this is all BS. Like, and then with the inflation and that, it's devaluing the money that you have in the bank and your investments. And, it's a hidden tax in a sense, like in a reality, not just in a sense, but,
yeah.
and this rate of inflation right now is really devaluing the money. Like you said, the money that I have invested, like I worked as an IT guy consulting, I saved a bunch of money, I put it into investments.
Mm.
That stored value from the money
Mm.
the money I was earning at the time.
Yeah.
I put that into savings and stored that value, but that's degrading, and that's being devalued rapidly at this point.
Yeah.
And that's another threat, like I mentioned. So, yeah, it's a tough situation, but like I mentioned, obviously gold coins, things like that. I still advise, personally, just having, like, it's like self custody of your own.
Yeah.
Even the crypto, like with Bitcoin, you don't want to have it just all sitting on an exchange somewhere,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if you have a wallet and you have your self custody of your private keys for your crypto,
Yep.
I'm not sure if everybody watching understands, what I'm saying, but
I would imagine most people do here. Yeah.
yeah. So that money is, if it's in your wallet, you have total control. Now, if they ban like on ramps of fiat where you can't go to an exchange and exchange fiat currency like Canadian dollars or US dollars for Bitcoin at these exchanges, if they block that,
Mm.
that's a huge threat in a sense that you're not going to be able to, people aren't going to be able to easily convert their money. Like if people start with this bank run, like people are starting to buy Bitcoin and things like that, realizing that their money is not available. And if that starts to accelerate, like the government's not going to like that too much, right? So
Yeah. Well, I will just say this though, and you're absolutely right. But how I try to balance it out, and of course, none of us knows how things are going to pan out exactly or precisely, right? Nobody has the magic 8 ball. But what I tell myself, because yeah, sometimes, especially when you get into the monetary aspect of it and just how corrupt it has become. Well, even when you talk about the old currencies that we used to use, even growing up. So your penny it wasn't just a penny, it was made of copper, right? Real copper. Like so it actually had actual, intrinsic value by the fact that it's still today. It's a commodity that's widely used, right? And same with our coinage back in the day that was actually silver. Hasn't been for decades upon decades. I think since the 1960s or so. But it was actual made of silver. Why? Because you just, at least even then, people realized you just can't trust, right? Whether it's a banking institution or a government or something, you needed something that let you sleep a little bit at night, which is why you had actual commodities that were actually worth, like, had an actual value to them. Same with gold. Now, like you were saying with the Bitcoin thing is definitely, it's a great thing in terms of the electronic exchange. But what I've always thought of, and I haven't really get into it, I have a Bitcoin wallet, mostly from people who donated to me years ago before it took off. So if they thought they were donating, like $10 or $25 to the, and I just let her sit there, and I'm just pure hodl, whatever, because I was never look. But that to me, now that would be one thing. As much as I hear you, and definitely government would definitely try to attempt. But what I keep thinking about is, first of all, the incentive structure, the kind of people, and then, like, I'm also the kind of person that growing up, I smoked marijuana, and I also understand how innovative the black, or what I would call the free market, can be, even when government can be very, very, very heavy-handed, right? So there's no mistake, there's no pretense that, of course, government, if there is an actual genuine digital cryptocurrency option such as Bitcoin that will challenge, the hegemony of the US dollar or anything like that, then they're definitely going to target it. But I just keep thinking, is government true? I just don't know if they have the kind of brain power or the competence to be able to carry out what they would try to undertake. That is a big thing for me, because I also recognize that there's a lot of big money. Now, you were talking about the bank there. Not sure if you're familiar. I didn't get too much into the story because I didn't have any holdings or deal with the Silicon Valley Bank, but you got brain power out there that are on our side too. So you not just your Elon Musk, but are you familiar with Peter Thiel?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, he's the guy that was obviously got something, heard something in the winds, and pulled out. And apparently, well, he's got quite the reputation as being a very wise venture capitalist himself. So a lot of other people, well, I mean, and that, whether that was the domino that brought it all down or not, I don't know. That's not for me to say. But once again, when I think about the kind of people who do want to bring about, usher in this CBDC, this government fiat currency, I think there's too many wise people who don't want to necessarily play with this current system and have serious money and clout themselves and the intelligence on that. Because that's the thing. Government has a lot of might, right? The entire brunt of the military. But what they do lack is that's the beautiful thing about the individual mind, right? Like, there's only your odd, Einsteins or your Peter Thiels or your Elon. Those aren't commodities that you can just print, right? So that to me is an area where, yeah, the government would definitely, and I don't think for a minute they won't try that, but I have a little bit of faith, right, in the fact that there's some really, really great minds out there that are very libertarian leaning. A lot of them, especially when you're talking about venture capitalists, it's that competitive spirit about them. It's not necessarily that they won't play games or they're maybe as morally superior in any way, but they don't want anyone to own them. They see themselves as a superpower, more or less. So there's a lot of converging interests that would be on the side of liberty if and when that potential CBDC thing does come down the line. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like when I was talking about the government, it's more of a force, like a military, not like they're going to have a superior product and it's going to beat the Bitcoin. Like the CBDC, from my understanding, even the other cryptos, like the Ethereum and all that stuff, you know, people will say like, well, you should have a gold-backed crypto or something. But the point of the crypto is that it's not centralized. Like if you have gold, it's got to be located somewhere. And that there's a vulnerability. Like with the crypto, you have your private key or even your seed phrase, like in your mind, you don't even have to like, so like if Canada did some things, a lot of other countries are probably going to keep the Bitcoin going. So like El Salvador is a small example, but there's an option hopefully for people to leave and go somewhere else. What I was referring to, local, like banning it locally, not from a superior product, but like you said, the military or the coercive militaristic, ability of the government. And then so basically either doing it outside of that system within the country or going somewhere else, because it's going to be it's going to be still functioning. It's just that there's not going to be there might be a drop in the value of in terms of in relation to fiat, because the demand of these, you can't go to exchanges and convert your fiat into those, or it's banned. So not, most people aren't going to want to go against the government. So there will be a definitely, I'm not saying I know exactly, what's going to happen, but like if you look at Russia, the BRICS, the BRICS countries, the petrodollar, there's alternatives, like they call it multipolar instead of US dominant. So there's a lot of threats to the US hegemony, and we're part of that, I guess. And the money they're sending over to Ukraine and all that stuff. So there's some part of me that thinks like you want to be on the other side almost, like, because you see like when Putin was talking about the fake wealth of the West, and he's got like the commodities like the oil and the wheat and they're buying gold in Russia and China and everything. There's all this real value versus the phony like Wall Street finance world, and then we're part of that. We're immersed in that on this side. So I guess I don't have all the answers, but I agree with you. I'm not saying I'm totally negative. I'm just worried about the government, like the fight, the power. But the point of the CBDC is like, it's not supposed to be a centralized control
Mm.
of cryptocurrency. It's not. I mean, there is one ledger, like Bitcoin has a ledger that you can look at and see all the transactions,
Mm.
but it's not supposed to be like, you're not supposed to be, what's the word, censored. Like the transactions are not censored, where if you went to a store and the government, like there's a bunch of things that are scary in terms of what I was going to say with the CBC, I just remembered, was when you were talking about the inflation and the defaulting of all the debt we have, there's going to be some, there could be some sort of reset where the
Yeah.
government says, all this money is dead. Now we have a CBDC and this is the value. So if you had money in the bank, it might be all of a sudden worth like 20% of what it was, like
Yeah.
in terms of the new currency. The other thing that's weird or scary, if they give you money like a UBI, like a universal thing,
Mm.
they can make it expire, like where it only lasts so long. So you gotta
Yeah.
spend it,
Yeah.
and then you're going to be restricted if you want to buy certain things and you said something, or that's the whole social credit stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's lots of crazy stuff going on. Um, and the fact that most people went along with all the COVID stuff and encouraged it, it's not encouraging just from the general population,
Yeah. That's true. Like that whole COVID thing, it really, well, for me, and I'm sure you've heard either me or other people say it too, is, and of course, it doesn't mean that it's the exact replica or a mirror, but I don't question, I don't question anymore, like why Nazi Germany went that way, or
Right.
fascist Italy went that way, or Stalinist Russia went that. I don't quite, I see how it works. I see how people, you build up people, and this constantly touting of experts, and we've been taught to trust experts. I see how that plays out now. So it's not really, it's not really a shocking thing to me anymore. But one thing I will say about the money thing, and actually it's related to this Silicon Valley Bank, basically now, after the financial crisis 2008, I mean, the astute people, your Peter Schiffs of the world, that predicted that happening anyways, based on his understanding and grasp of macro and microeconomics and his Austrian economics background. But and there were some people that saw it coming and warned, and the people get out of it before shit really hit the fan. But one thing that they can't do anymore. See, there was a good narrative, and they still had a coordinated effort from the media and everyone that was putting forth this narrative, and it was unbelievably, but it was still sellable. It was, to me, and I could see how it was sellable. That okay, it was, Lehman's was just too big to fail, blah blah. But after this situation right here, right now it's going to take a while for this to shake out. But there's going to be a lot of great minds and some average minds. There's going to be a lot of minds in the business, the financial, and governments. They're going to be thinking long and hard about what this precedent actually has done, because what they've done now is, there's literally, I was saying, the military is basically about the only thing that backs the US dollar, and that is literally now, they basically said, they basically pulled back the curtains and said, yeah, that is it. There's no longer a pretense anymore that it's grounded or based on any market fundamentals or proper ethics or anything, because not only did they bail out the Silicon Valley Bank, so it's not like Lehman Brothers, and the entire housing market and all the fear that they were using for that, but two subsequent banks, and they put out the actual on notice for the rest of the banking industry in the US, and I would imagine even other countries around the world, that everyone's too big to fail now. And once you've sent that message into the market, it's going to take a while for the market to absorb that. And like I say, there's going to be really smart people that are pro-liberty oriented, that are going to try to figure out ways to try to get us out from underneath of this mess. But even the ones that are part of the status quo or the current established system that's been working good for, like I say, there's nobody, they can't tell anyone in their inner circle anymore. The illusion, like I say, that the emperor has literally walked out on stage completely butt naked, and there's nowhere for him to hide anymore. Because like I say, there's nothing left now. They, when they say that, any fail, it's not that it was the the biggest bank that had to fail. What was it, number 18? And because the US has like, I don't know, thousands of banks, like it's not like in Canada where we have our big six and maybe a dozen or so small ones. Like US literally has like, as a long haul truck driver, there's banks you've never heard of, like so many different banks in the US. So when they sent that message and that signal, and the fact that the US is the world's reserve currency, like I say, there's a lot of powerful people in lots of different countries, some good actors, some bad actors, and all in between, that's gonna have a serious problem or concern in terms of the US hegemony going forward. We already knew that it was already basically on the precipice. I mean, just since 1913, I think it's at what, 96 or 97% at least of its value. It's been basically just blown away into the wind, right, over the course of that 100 some years. But yeah, this is not going to play out good for anyone in the current financial and economic system. And it's unfortunate that, that there are going to be some good people that are going to get harmed along the way. But this is, like I say, this is just like with everything. I'm not excited about the fact that, some people are going to be harmed financially. But once again, there is an opportunity now, because even people that typically would be hesitant or standoffish and just, let's just go along, it's working so far, right? You're going to have a whole lot more of those people that are going to be, hey, what are them libertarians saying again? Right? Hey, what did that Austrian economist that used to hassle me in school? Maybe I should, what was his number? You know what I mean? So things are definitely going to happen, or at least that's my thought process on it.
Yeah, like I remember recently posting like RIP MMT, so to speak, like modern monetary theory, because it's like,
yeah,
hopefully people realized that that printing, like, because I had people tell me a couple of years ago, like, oh, don't worry, once our GDP goes up, then our debt to GDP will be normal again after the government spending money and giving out stimmy checks and after they closed all the businesses. And I knew right away, like I said that, because my economic understanding, I was like, that's not, that's not going to happen. And sure enough, it took a couple of years or so, but now we're sort of, but like Jagmeet Singh will go up and say, there's greedy oil companies or greedy grocery companies. And so they misdirect the true aspect of the government and the central bank printing.
Yeah.
And also, like with the Silicon Valley, what happened was they bought a bunch of, they basically bought these mortgage-backed securities at 10-year, and the value went down. So they had these huge losses, right? So the government's basically saying, we're going to give you the face value of these bonds, like even though they're down 20+%, they're going to, so like you said, right now, like I'm looking at the markets going, is the Fed going to pivot right now? Is that really a pivot? Because if that's a pivot, and let's say they don't raise rates anymore, then inflation is going to stay higher or even go higher, right? Potentially. So you've got this situation where they're going to let inflation go if they don't keep raising rates, and then they're going to break more stuff. Like we're starting to see the banks starting to break, if that was a one-off, or if it's going to start to perpetuate. If they keep raising rates even a half or a quarter, to maybe even more, 0.5% to get inflation down. But yeah, like Peter Schiff's been talking about stuff, and of course you don't know all the timing, but his economic knowledge is like, you just keep printing money, and rates were too low for too long prior to this.
Yeah.
So individually, like, I didn't do as much as I probably should have, but as I'm watching these videos for the last number of years, I knew things were where things are going. Like you said, with the dimes and the silver and the copper, I mean, Rome did that. They start cutting off pieces of the coin. And so, I mean, it's going to happen over and over again. So like I said, the final thing I guess we could talk about, just specifically, if you're experiencing that, like from a libertarian perspective and individual perspective, like what suggestions you have for people other than education, like what you're providing to people, which is a great service to, but also like, what do you recommend people do individually at different levels politically, but individually with preparing for things and financially? I think connecting with each other like you're doing
Yeah.
here. Um, like we don't have a lot of time, I don't think, even though I'm promoting or I'm suggesting like the free province, we have a small population, we have the chance to make bigger changes, but we also don't have a ton of time, and other places are further along in that process as well. So,
Yeah. Well, that's actually why I'm kind of really interested to get to talk to, because I'll even admit, sadly, I was doing a lot more thinking than doing, but of course I was trying to get myself up to speed in a lot of this stuff because I don't feel comfortable, right? Telling people, things that I think that's probably a good way to function or act, unless I make sure I've cleaned up my own room and all that
that's true.
stuff, I
Yeah.
guess. Right. But now I'm definitely really interested and I'm going to be having a conversation on Friday morning, 11 o'clock, our time, 10 o'clock, New Hampshire time. And we talking with Dennis Pratt. He's one of the guys from the Free State
Yeah.
Project. And I'm going to be asking him lots of questions about, in terms of like how they've done it, all different areas of the social and the economic, because that's everything. Economics is important, but social too. And of course the business thing, that's a big thing to me, is getting businesses, to move into these areas and making it even so that it's viable. Now, like I say, farming is definitely something that would be viable, because that's groceries,
Yeah.
food, those are things that are always going to be in demand. But what are other areas? Well, like I say, now that we have things such as, like I say, I have my Starlink. I was actually just mentioned that I've had it for what, a year and a half now. And I was mentioned, actually, I got an email from Starlink that they actually are putting on for a limited time. I don't know how long this is going to be, but you can get hooked up on Starlink now, get their system for $350 Canadian. I was like, what? It's their new, because it's the new and improved one compared to the one I got. One of the original round dishes. They're now rectangular, but it's the new upgraded version, and it's basically less than half price. So if you were worried about starting a business in maybe some of these small rural communities, such as where I live, because there are a lot of rural communities in New Brunswick, or even some of our smaller cities that doesn't, if you're on the outskirts, that doesn't have great cell phone coverage. Well, now you can get real high speed internet, and now even at a decent price, and the monthly fee is not that bad. I was paying like, I think it was like 90 some bucks for, what was the one we had before? I can't think of the name. ExploreNet.
Right.
Anyways, and I pay like 120 bucks for Starlink. So it's not that much more expensive. But it is something that you would need if you're going to do a startup, business where you need, high amounts of not just download capacity, but even upload capacity. Then that, once again, will afford you that opportunity. And there's lots of, like I say, innovation that's taken place on the micro level in terms of giving people the ability to build homes rather cheaply in certain areas, get your wells set up and things. So there are lots of areas that I would suggest, and that to me is the big thing. And me personally, one thing about me working in the construction trade, and I'm back driving truck for the paving crew that I worked for years, is when people say, well, how about them roads? Well, I'm sorry. Now, this once again is a funding issue right now, but I am one of those people that is out there, every summer making sure to build some roads or to repair some, or parking lots or driveways and all kinds of things. And of course, in my community, I'm not sure if you watched. I only did one or two of them, and I'm going to try again, but it's just to put my feelers out in the community. We have a local rec center, and usually in these communities, you can rent your local rec center because you're basically already paying for it through your taxes, anyways. But you can rent them for here. You can rent it for $50. So if you wanted to, like me, I put on a thing. I try to get people in the community interested. I call them Liberty lessons, because to me that's something I would think that people might, or at least some, try to entice some people to be interested. What does it even mean to be a free human being? Because to me, that's the one area. Now it's taken me about 12 years to get my brain up to speed so that I can kind of explain these things with relative ease, and at least in somewhat layman terms, so I don't sound like some wonky, you know, someone from academia or such. But to me, that every little thing that I can do, and like I say, holding little events in the summer, car shows, meeting up with other people and discussing these kinds of things. Like anytime I get a chance, I won't just walk up to a stranger and interject anything pertaining to liberty, but I'm a listener too. And if my ear hears anything that's even remotely along that lines, whether it's they're complaining about something that some politician has done. Well, I'm taking that time out of my life, and I do that on a regular basis. And I'm going to try and have those engaging conversations, because I firmly believe that most people will at least, listen to you, give you the time of the day, as long as you're not doing it in a confrontational manner. But I believe a lot of people are, at least at this point in time, because there is so much confusion. When I first started talking about this stuff and learned about this stuff 10 years ago, I think it was a little early. So when I think about some of the libertarians have been talking since I was even born, like, darn, you guys have been really, really going hard at it. But actually, I think now in 2023, and with all this social media, it's not a new thing anymore. Social media is very much part and parcel of our culture, and the ability to be able to communicate with so many people with relative ease, and even me with paying with live stream and stuff, not that expensive. I think we actually have the opportunity in the 2020s here, and for the next years, to because like I say, it seems like there's fertile ground now where people are at least more interested. I think it's a little bit more difficult to just bat away the libertarians, right, than you might have been able to do 10 years ago. So I do firmly believe that there's fertile ground out there. And like I say, anytime I get a chance in my personal life and my work life, or anywhere I'm out and about, I'm always trying my best to help bring about these ideas and these concepts, or talk to people about what it is to be a free human being. And the more we can do that, I think the better off. I mean, how much benefit, I don't know, but it definitely can't do any harm.
No, yeah, no, you're doing a great service. Like I said, I've seen your videos for years,
Well, that's great.
and yeah, like I was going to mention that, because you mentioned Dennis Pratt, that I talked to Jeremy Kaufman, who is also a Free Stater. He ran for senator.
Yep.
He started Odyssey, the YouTube equivalent that you know of.
Yep.
And when I talked to him, I'm like you. I wanted to know, like, my instinct or whatever is to go, like, what are other people doing? How do they do this, and what's working, and what should we do? So when I talked to Jeremy, I said to him, like, what do you suggest we do up here in New Brunswick? Like, because they want people generally to move there, but of course Canadians generally can't do that, like, permanently. But
right.
I have U.S. citizenship. My mother was born.
Lucky you.
I went through like a lot of BS initially to get all the documentation together, and then after 10 plus years, I let it lapse because I thought, like, not the citizenship, but the passport expired.
Right.
And then when I finally decided, it was like 15 years, they said, no, you have to do it all. Like, you have to, not all over again, but you have to dig up a bunch of stuff and go down to Halifax. And this is with COVID and everything. So I eventually went through, because I started seeing the threats of Canada with the COVID stuff. And I said, I'm going to go get my passport renewed. I thought maybe I even lost citizenship because I hadn't, or it expired or whatever, but apparently. Right. But anyway, so I got that going, just so I've got that in my back pocket. So I could technically at some point decide to go to New Hampshire if I, right on. Of course, that brings up the healthcare and, getting that all, what you're going to do, if it's going to be like 6 months back and forth, all that stuff. But when I asked Jeremy about the Free State Project, and one of the main things he mentioned was the Pork Fest. Every year they have like that event. Yeah. So Mark, I don't know if he mentioned it, but there's this thing he set up. He was talking about called Chick Fest, which is the chickadee, Chick Fest.
Yeah.
And also politically incorrect a little bit, but so it's like a dual meaning there. But
yeah.
And then I think you had talked to Mitchell Foley. Is that right? You had interviewed him?
Yep.
He talked about events in Nova Scotia, and he mentioned Cumberland County when when you guys talked about that they wanted their own police force or something.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So, like, when I heard that, I think I want to start connecting with him and other people and seeing what's working, what's not working locally and at other levels. Because, but like Jeremy talked about, having an event, having these meetups. So Mark's already had, or there's been a couple of in-person gatherings, and but I'm also the person, like, politically, like, what are we going to do? Like, what can we do? And specifically, like, other than talking and stuff like that. So even though, like, for years I've been reading all this stuff, and I tell my wife about, you know, what's going on in the crazy world, and she's like, you know, are you going to do anything or just talk, etc. So, part of the reason why I reached out to Mark, and I was like the first person apparently who called him, was to start to get involved and try to do things. And then recently we had, you know how they're combining those ridings? I don't know if they're doing that in Fredericton, but they're like consolidating all these ridings in New Brunswick. So like we had these LSDs, they call them, the rural things, combined with Sackville, New Brunswick, which is a university type town. And basically my wife decided to run for mayor, and she got smeared like far right, all this crazy stuff. Like there's a guy who worked at CBC. He's a local journalist, and he wrote a multi articles about, but somebody had actually gone in on Facebook, like somebody had actually gone to her Twitter feed and cut and paste stuff to make it look really bad. And then the guy wrote these articles that were wrong, like were deceiving, far right, all this stuff. And then the one leftist guy went on to Facebook, and he tried to pay the administrator to give him the chat logs, the private chat logs of my wife, so that he could see if there's anything, you know, that he could. And this is like a local small town, like Sackville's about 5,000 people. Of course, it's the university, Mount Allison's like very woke, you know, etc. So she took the initiative, and the guy that was mayor lost probably because of her, because she got, based on the votes that she got, you know, he could have won if he got those votes. But the new guy's not any better. He's probably worse, but at least the guy that was in there is out. But there's more councillors from the rural regions now because, you know, because of the way it's organized now. It's not all just Sackville, which was they would blow money. They have a climate change coordinator position, like full time. They have a climate change committee that goes and sort of dictates, you know, what the town's going to do. They put in electric vehicle chargers, and they bought a weather vane that was like an artistic thing that they shipped from BC to symbolize climate change and stuff like that. So, you know, they spend quite a bit of money in our town. So I wanted to get involved. I started contacting the councillors. So I'm wondering, like, if we get all the Liberty people and the PPC and the People's Alliance and etc. to sort of focus on their own area and try to at least communicate with the councillors at a municipal level, and even at a provincial and a federal level. That may happen outside of a free province, like, because they're not political per se, but and then all these events, just getting people together to talk about liberty in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and wherever. I think that'd be great, and just connect everybody.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. One thing that the New Hampshire, you know, their Free State Project has is not just the Free State Project, but, you know, even everything they would have been taught in school, or even if they're loosely just taught in basically, you know, the maybe television or movies, or just anecdotal stories from grandpa or something, but the history, right? Just the very history of the United States is an act of rebellion against authority. So they're already leaps and bounds ahead of the Canadians in terms of the culture. And that's something that took me a while to understand is, dang, why do we have, and once it was explained to me more, and not just from people like Lark and Rose talking about it, but even Ayn Rand even touched on it, but Stefan Molyneux and others is, and not just that, if you go back some of the figureheads from the Enlightenment era too, is it has really become a religion. So, you know, the people who are just, you know, just kind of go along, maybe the ignorant, those are people that, you know, you definitely have the chance, you know, maybe someone that you hang out with on a regular basis that isn't political. The people who aren't political at all are the people that you'll probably have the best chance of even having any kind of engaging conversation. But yeah, anyone that's seemingly part of the political process or invested in this current system anyway, you might as well be an atheist, you know, standing up on at the pulpit, right? at an evangelical big event down in one of the southern states, because you're just not going to have a receptive audience. And it's an unfortunate thing is Canadians, we're predisposed to not just believing in authority, but multiple levels. I mean, we have a monarchy still, right? I mean, sure, it's considered a figurehead, but for some reason, we still feel that we need it. For some, I don't. I hate using that term "we" actually in the collective sense because I don't, and I'm sure you probably don't. But the fact that people still believe, and then the three layers of government. So like we're constantly inundated from the time we're children, basically, right? To statism is the status quo. Statism is the norm. But I'm a Canadian. You're a Canadian. I didn't know anything about this stuff. I even come from a religious family where mysticism was normal. So I was susceptible to falling for more mysticism. It was possible, but once again, I guess there are areas where I recognize thankful to my own family, in my own, like my mother's side of the family. She was actually, other than her brother, which is the guy I'm named after, my uncle, four of the sisters went into government position. My mother was one of the ones. Well, she had us young, so she didn't get into the government. So I didn't get a whole lot of that extra government stuff as I get older. And as a Gen Xer, I guess even most of us as Gen Xers kind of have a little bit of a luck in our way in terms of a lot of us were raised as latchkey kids. Our parents were kind of doing their thing, right? And we were kind of left to our own devices, which was actually a great thing, a great beneficial thing, because that's how I learned to navigate the world without needing authority, right? It was a beautiful thing. It helped me out a lot. So there are definitely people who are susceptible. And like I say, definitely when you're talking about demographics, Gen Xers, I would say if you know people I would assume you're a Gen Xer, are you? Or how old are you?
I'm 53.
Yeah, so you're a Gen Xer too. So yeah, so I would suggest that there are at least people that are susceptible to listen to these kinds of things. But the big thing, what I've noticed is making it into a confrontational thing is not really beneficial because people don't like to work. Even myself, people don't like to work through their cognitive um, biases or dissonance in real time in front of another person. It's an uncomfortable experience, right? So what I've always done, and I see that it does work, is don't get into a big argument debate. Say what you've got to say if you feel a need to say it, and in a respectful manner. And like I say, that's stuff these people will not forget. And as long as you're leading by example, see, that's another thing I learned growing up too with a lot of those religious figureheads, right? Is some of them were the worst sinners you'll ever meet. So to me, the people that I grew up to actually learn and respect and trust were the ones that actually didn't just talk the talk, but they walked the walk. So as long as as long as you're the kind of person that is truly the kind of person you're putting on here, and just like I am, and you're doing the right things yourself, and you're leading by example, and you make sure that your points or things that you're talking about with other people that you're articulating them properly. Don't leave any areas as best like so. Get your mind up to speed. So press yourself on even some of the things so you know how to counter it. Like I just realized, and I've always kind of been good at that, is put yourself in that other person's perspective and what's the best way that you could help that person. Like what would be your best way? And I think that works best. But in the absence of that, yeah, just continue leading by example. Do every little bit that you can, and as long as all of us, and then we're definitely going to have to do things where we get together, because that is another thing that actually I think is very beneficial, and we haven't really had much of that, especially me in this province. And I didn't even go to Ottawa for the thing, but it is good for a little reprieve and for people that have at least that like-minded and are genuinely curious about liberty to get together, right? Because we kind of fuel each other in some way. So I think that's definitely a good thing. And this pork fest or this chick roast or whatever the heck you want, I think that's a great idea. But yeah, all the little things, and don't even rely on like me. Like I'll listen to other people just like you because I recognize I'm just one person, and I'll take pointers and listen to other things people say. But hey, you might even think of something that none of us have thought about. So don't leave that off the table either. You might come up with something that well, I mean, I've been into this whole liberty thing for a long time, but Mark was the guy that come up with the idea to start this. So like I say, and I didn't know Mark from a hole in the ground until I heard about him. So hey, to me, like I say, to me that it just gives me more positive signs that there are people out there. It's just that we haven't all come in contact with each other as of yet. But the more that we can do to try to do that, and like I say, doing these live streams and talking to other people. Oh, do you know this guy? And the more we can bring this together, especially in the province, I will say it matters for the rest of the world, but for you or I living in New Brunswick, it matters tremendously for us how things unfold in this province. And for me, and I'm not sure if you probably do remember, but I was so there for the first bit, and my oldest son was still living in Ontario at the time, and he was envious because the fact that they went into their big lockdown, but Higgs so far didn't do it. And what it was he was getting pushback from, I don't know if it was Chris Austin himself, but the People's Alliance, or at least the people that were supporting the People's Alliance, maybe were chirping, calling on the phones, but he wasn't willing to go along with that. Now, of course, Higgs called an election. He got his majority, and well, crisscrossed the floor and say la vive as far as that goes. But we did, at least for a time, have an area where New Brunswick was an exception and an outlier in terms of not going in that kind of top-down tyrannical route. Now, it did end up happening, but once again, at the very least, it showed people that that threat is always there. It's always there. It's omnipresent. And what I've tried to explain to people too is if you've made it to 2023, and this, I'm not saying you should say this to too many people, but if you made it to 2023 or whatever, how old you are in your life, and you think government is benevolent in any ways, like, well, you're probably a pretty boring person and you've never challenged authority in any way. And to be honest with you, those people, maybe not so helpful. And I would expect people like that are just like the flock, right? They'll go whichever way. So if liberty's the thing, they'll go with that. So, and those are people that I think we're the least to be concerned. The ones that we have to be overly concerned with are obviously the ones that are very politically active, and whether they're doing it through malevolence or just, they're ideologically driven and believe they're doing good or some concept of the greater good, there are real threats to us because there are a lot of believers among us. And if we can, help people to break free from that mindset of statism, like I say, if we can have less believers in the state and more believers in liberty, then, like I say, that's how we're going to bring about that in this province. And hopefully, I hear you, I want it done just as quick as you do. The quicker the better. But I also recognize that even if it doesn't come in my lifetime, it's something that I still feel is worthwhile because I have kids, and I raised them. They both, they would call themselves libertarians. They're really decent, upstanding two sons of mine, great and productive members of society. And like I say, that to me, and if they're the kind of guys that aren't going to hang out with status. So yeah, the more people we can bring in our communities that can do this and lead by example and show how peaceful and prosperous it is, then I think more people will gravitate towards liberty just by natural, once again, back to the self-preservation and what works best. Because I think what works best for most people, right, is freedom and liberty. Even if they might disagree with it in certain areas, most people, especially if they're talking about themselves or the people they love, they want to maximize their freedom as much as they can, right?
Yeah, I think that on the positive side of what they did to the protesters with the RCMP and the horses and the bank accounts and all the lockdowns and mandates, it kind of exposed that the authoritarianism is there, like that you didn't necessarily recognize. Like other people, average person that just goes to work and doesn't pay attention, they think they're free and they can do whatever they want, and then all this stuff comes out, and then so there's people that went along. They had to do it to get it. They had to get a vaccine because they didn't necessarily just buy into it.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people who've seen the tyrannical nature, and like with Twitter, it's one shining example of, like, because the media, like, I think a lot of people, and I'm part of it as well, like over time I've just seen this insane propaganda turned towards the instead of externally and the CIA, external countries, like turned internal. And like the people are seeing like the BS more and more. So, I mean, even like I know maybe a lot of Canadians don't like Donald Trump, but I think it did red pill a lot of people because when he at first when if he said fake news or whatever, you're like he's just saying that because he doesn't like what they're saying about him. But then you started now you've seen the CIA, the FBI, with this January 6th stuff. I mean, when I watch CBC or whatever, every story um, is total garbage. Like they miss things, they totally distort things. Whenever they bring anybody on, it's always that one perspective. Even an American will come on and talk about something, and it's like, well, that guy is a rhino. He's not a, he's not really. He's part of the swamp. And so more and more people have seen that. And then with Twitter, like during COVID, you couldn't talk about alternative treatments, you couldn't talk about side effects, and you couldn't talk about Hunter Biden laptop. All that stuff is like it's inundated now. When I look at my For You tab on Twitter, I see unbelievable stuff now that would never have been. But like you still have the Ukraine propaganda, like pro-war. Even Pierre Poilievre, let's send more stuff, military equipment, and like in my town, there's the Ukraine like a display in front of our community center, like the flag, whatever.
Yeah.
And but I think more and more, if there's with the internet, like you said, and Twitter and all that stuff, there's people are seeing, if they look a little bit, they're definitely getting alternative views. And like the news media, like you get these little 1 minute, 2 minute sound bites, whereas I watch like your stuff 2-3 hour, what are they, Joe Rogan or all these different discussions, Dave Smith. I love long, in-depth discussions about topics, whereas the soundbite where they barely scratch the surface of a topic, I can't stand that. So,
yeah. Well, it's funny because you brought up the Trump thing, and actually, I was talking to my son, and actually a little bit with my wife there before we went live. I mean, how crazy is it? The fact, I mean, there's lots of areas where I could even agree with some people who are, the never Trumpers in some areas. You want to insult the guy or this. So there's some areas I can find some, because I'm not the super Trump fan or whatever, but I do recognize the man for what he's accomplished in his life. And when I hear people like, I was listening to actually earlier, Sam Harris and Lex Friedman having a conversation. I actually haven't heard Sam Harris in a while because he seems to have dropped out of the circles. And I think I know why. The guy has a serious case of the Trump derangement syndrome. But if you think about the Ukraine-Russian war, I mean, I don't care which side of the political divide, unless you're an absolute warmonger or a neocon, you have to be in your heart of heart knowing that, holy fuck, who's the one man in the world that his whole thing is, let's make a deal, right? Who's the one man in the world that has the courage and the oratorial skills? Like people like to call Trump an idiot or an Neanderthal, but he's anything but the sorts. He's not, he's not maybe a perfected politician in terms of his vernacular, but thank God he's not, right? But that's the thing. It's like Trump would be the guy. I mean, he was the guy that went over to visit Kim Jong-il, right? Right? I mean, this is the guy that literally, if you wanted peace, if you want less Ukrainians, less Russians dying, right? He would be the guy that would have the courage, rather than it seems now, it might very well be, and I'm sure Trump's probably chomping on the bit, the fact that maybe Xi Jinping is going to be the savior, come to be the big peace negotiator. But I would imagine it would have been something that, like I say, Trump, well, I mean, who's to say that even, I don't like to speculate, but who's to say that maybe this whole thing might not have played out if Trump had still been at the helm? Because one thing I do recognize, and this is the thing about the people that insult Trump all the time, is it's precisely the fact that you can't figure that guy out and say, oh, he's gonna, it's his abrasiveness and his off the cuff style is what other world leaders respect and also fear, right? So he kind of had that in spades in terms of, even if you think Putin's this crazy guy or Xi Jinping, well, Trump is enough of that to those guys that they're like, oh, okay. They might not be willing to, I mean, but you got a geriatric like freaking Biden and, team, I wouldn't even say B. Well, you're all the way down to the bottom of the alphabet in terms of the kind of people that he's surrounded himself with. And that's and no wonder, I suppose, no wonder why China sees fit now to step into that position or place. But yeah, I'm not a hater of Trump like so many people are, and it kind of does infuriate me by the simple fact that he doesn't get the proper acknowledgement for the fact that he didn't get us, not Canada per se, but didn't get the U.S. into another fucking quagmire, another war. So he was the first president in like decades, right, that hasn't done so. He did some things that I think, for sure, at least rhetorically, pissed off some of the woke progressives. But what did he actually do to inflict harm on them? I don't think he inflicted the kind of harm. Like I say, it's just a lot of very entitled elitists that I think what it is not so much that when it comes to Trump, is just they fear that guy, and he's not someone that they can control. And that, to me, that is the biggest thing. What I've noticed is these people are so power hungry and such control freaks. Is what it comes down to is doesn't matter your background, your history, what you got between your legs, your skin color. Really, what it comes down to the end of the day, if you're willing to challenge the status quo in any way, that makes you automatically enemy number one. And you know what? If that's what made Trump enemy number one, then I got to tell you, I'm not a statist by any stretch, but I'm a bit of a fan.
Yeah, exactly. People can't really look at like all the things that got accomplished. Like it's just his rhetoric, his demeanor, but they all loved him when he was on Apprentice and real estate. Right. And it's like now Elon Musk, the same thing. Like he's Tesla, climate change, he's going to save the world. SpaceX, now they hate him. And when Elon bought Twitter, my wife tweeted or something, "Go Elon," and there was some tweet he had said. And then they wrote an article locally about the fact that I'm like, this is the guy they all loved like 2 minutes ago. And, and I think Trump, like with the war aspect, you have these conservatives that are generally, warmongers, I guess you could say, part of the swamp. And he introduced the fact that he didn't want to go to war, and he got ISIS taken care of, and now you have the left being, it's like a weird reversal. Like they're pro-war, they're pro-big pharma. Like you couldn't criticize, you couldn't come up with these alternative treatments. It had to be.
And the pro-pharma things flipped literally during the transition from the presidency, right? Because they were anti anything that Trump was going to bring in terms of vaccines until it was no longer Trump. And then
they said they weren't going to. I remember Kamala, somebody said they weren't going to take the vaccine and all that. And then, so like, Sam Harris is interesting because I followed him early when like he was atheist stuff and he was talking about various religions. But then I disagreed. The first thing I disagreed with him on, he wrote a book about free will, and I was like, this is BS. Just because there's a delay between the subconscious, like a microsecond, that doesn't mean that there's no free will to me. Right. And so, and then recently, well, I think there was something with the Kavanaugh. I don't know what it is. Like I can look at something and go, if somebody accuses you of gang rape and all this stuff, and when I listen to Blasey Ford, I can sort of sense if they're telling the truth, or if it's one man's, he said, she said. And I look at principles, like I look at innocent until proven guilty, all this kind of stuff. Whereas other people like, oh, somebody's crying, okay. And then, so Sam Harris said something about that, and I realized that's when it started going downhill. And then the Trump thing, and then he recently was saying like Hunter Biden could have, kids in the basement buried and that he wouldn't care, So they would bypass all sorts of like rules of law in order to get somebody else. And now they're seeing like Biden, what he did with pulling out of Afghanistan and this whole economy stuff. Now I think Trump, like inflation's a long-term thing. It's like the money printing, the Fed. It's not. And Trump wanted interest rates to stay low because it looks good for him. So like I'm not a huge. I don't just like 100% rah Trump or anything. Just like this individual issues. But Sam Harris just recently went off the rails, and then he ended up leaving, Twitter because he got this harassment. But like you said, the biggest case of Trump derangement you've ever seen, and it's like just because he's a buffoon or he says stupid things or he's crude or whatever, like, can't you look at the policies that got passed and the lack of war and the lowest unemployment for Black and Hispanics at the time and these Middle East peace deals and there was these yeah, there was so many things like just policies, but
Yeah.
um,
He gets, it seems that he gets, Sam seems to, and I'll accuse other people of it too, but they seem to get caught up, way too caught up in the personality. Whereas I think someone like yourself and someone like myself, I'm way more concerned with the ideas, right? That they're talking about, or the actual tangible things that you're seeing that are taking place
yeah,
rather than rhetoric. I mean, rhetoric to me is like, and the fact that he constantly talks about the fact that Trump lies all the time is like, you're talking about politics here, right? They're all professional liars. That's literally, if you're not lying, you're not a politician. So it's like, can we stop with the,
yeah,
like that to me, and that's where an honest person like myself or someone like you, like, I'm trying to follow his line of reason. I got nothing against Sam, but it's like, okay, you've gone completely off the rails here now. Like, I'm right with you until you do this constant, like this,
yeah,
you fucking
yeah,
pull the emergency brake and you're going back the other way just as quick as you're like, what? I don't know. I can't follow your line of reasoning much more there, Sam.
yeah. Like if you like
That's the
Trump,
thing.
or if
But
you like
the
Trump,
good thing,
you can
sorry,
still
go ahead.
disagree. Sorry, Sam or anybody you like. It's like, oh, as soon as there's certain things you don't agree with, and um, you can say I don't agree with X, Y, Z. And Jordan Peterson
Yeah.
was, he had interesting stories about religion and all the classic, stories that repeat themselves, the hero and the
Yeah.
heroine and the dragon and all that stuff. I get what he's trying to say. A story is the power, and then you'll say other things, like, okay, I don't agree with that, and
Yeah.
so yeah, that just doesn't mean you blindly follow somebody just because you like.
No. Well, that's the thing. And you should, and a person that, that's being honest with themselves or with anyone else, like for me with the Jordan Peterson thing, as a libertarian, like I get that it's, and I'm definitely not a fan or support a lot of this crazy transition and stuff, and with the trans community and stuff. But but to me, for me, my only position is the person making that voluntary choice, and if they're a child, then you can't say that they're at the level to make that voluntary choice because we all know that. So, but outside of that, like, I don't want it, like, to me, with the drag time stories, like, there's so many things that you could be occupying your time with, right, to help elevate, educate, and inform the people, which he's done, and I'll give him credit for that. But to be constantly, to me, it seems like now it's just giving conservative-minded people a new way for them to get back to their old religious way, where they're condemning people, like, or trying to get into the bedrooms of of citizens. And as much as I'm not uh, for some of that stuff, and I'm sure some of these people that are doing it are going to go through hell in their own minds, whether it's the children or the parents. But you gotta understand that a lot of this stuff is people dealing with some serious issues, and really for outsiders to be playing these games with it and stuff. I just, these are people that probably need help. Probably, I would say a substantial portion of them have serious issues, and they probably need some friggin' help rather than for them to be out there looking and seeing. Just once again, when you look out in society, no matter who you are these days, it's like, well, there's the Leafs or the Maple Leafs. Like, there's Team Red or Team Blue, and neither of them have your best interests at heart. They're all self-absorbed, right? It's all about, but that's the thing. That's one area where I think where we're going to shine. So we've been putting in the work, the effort, and not just in our personal lives, but because we do this stuff online and people can get access to this information. I personally have my channel, just my YouTube. I think was it 2014, 2013, I think it was when I started this. And I've been on Facebook even much longer than that. But there's all this evidence, plus the people who've then, even the ones that have just been tacitly listening off to the sides, or not paying a whole lot of attention. But over the years, I've built up my credibility. And like I say, now with all the stuff, whether you're talking about the economics, with the banking bailouts now, or with all the blinders that have come off in terms of COVID, or some of the craziness in terms of war, and like the left now supporting war. And so now at least, and when you're talking about left and right, every one of those people, right, are somebody's family member, somebody's friend, somebody's coworker, somebody's neighbor. So all of that now, like I say, all the blinders are coming off. We've for the most part peeled off most of their blinders. I won't say I can see 100% because trust me, I still got lots to learn, but at least I can see a whole lot better. Like, the reality that I see is a whole lot more representative of genuine reality than what most people are seeing out there in their narrow focus. But like I say, all these things that have been taking place in recent years, it's peeling a layer off each time. And I tell you, it's there's the people out there, especially the fence sitters, the ones that are apolitical, the ones that typically don't sway one way or the other. They're seeing this, and they are the silent majority. And those are the people, like I say, that we need. And they are the people in our community that, like I say, they're not political in any way. They just probably just put their nose to the grindstone, go to work every day, do their thing, and they're just like you or I, wondering what the fuck is going on, right? Well, like I say, by sheer fact that we're training our minds, we're leading by example. We don't have answers in terms of what you should do, but we at least have the answers of what best. Like I can tell people, I don't know what's going. I'll tell you what's worked good for me. You know what I mean? I can tell you that with 100% certainty, and the people around me can tell you the exact same thing. And I think that to me is the biggest advantage that we have today. Sure, the states have a lot of the power in terms of like guns and enforcers at their disposal, but they have the wrong ideas, and it's constantly being proven time and time again. Like I say, the emperor is not wearing any clothes anymore, so the people that typically would be falling in line or believe in some of this stuff, even they can no longer believe the rhetoric. So I think we're actually at a good time, even though it seems bad. And I'm not saying things are going to get bright and sunny tomorrow, and I imagine we're still going to have quite a few dark days ahead of us. But I guess that's the same with it's crazy. Everything that has ever happened to me, I've always had to go through something bad in order for something good to come out on the other side. I don't know why that is, but that does seem to always be the case, right? So maybe that's what it is. Maybe there's more people today that are going to go through that bad, and it'll give them that time to reflect. And like I say, we live in the age of information where ignorance truly is a choice. So there's always that too, right? That's to me, I'm always trying to be hopeful and kind of prepare for the worst, hope for the best and prepare for the worst kind of deal, right?
Yeah, I should talk to you more because you're more optimistic, than I am. But I mean, I'm optimistic in the sense that I'm still trying to do things.
Yeah.
But when you see what's coming and all the threats and all the different things, and you have ideas about what to do, and there's positive occurrences like with the Twitter takeover. I mean, there's hope here and there, and there's people like you and with Mark got that set up, the New Hampshire stuff, and so it depends on what you focus on, but I mean a lot of times just the fact that you guys are what you're doing and other people are taking action, there's still hope and there's still that drive to kind of improve things. And like I'm keeping my options open. Like if I saw, I mean, I don't even know, but if I saw Alberta do a lot of sovereignty stuff, and like I want a province to be more independent. Like when you have a healthcare, it's supposed to be provincial policing and education, let's say.
Yeah.
But when Trudeau like sort of bribes or coerces them because he's got the money for the healthcare, then that independence isn't really there to determine how you're going to set up your healthcare. Like if you want more private options, more competition, and he says, well, we're going to take clawback money or we're going to not give you as much money, then basically, the provincial autonomy is not really there because of that transfer payment aspect. But if I see like Alberta or New Brunswick or whatever with like I'm a fan of decentralization. That's the concept.
Yeah.
That like countries, local cryptocurrency working, you can do, like you said, New Brunswick's great because now people can get internet access and move here, and sort of there's a lot more remote work. So it's a great opportunity. You don't have to be in a big city a lot of times nowadays. So yeah, like I like your attitude that you're still hopeful and positive, because we need that. If you're going to have the energy and the drive to still do things, you have to sort of hope that that things are going to get better. And I'm not obviously like Trudeau, as they stay longer, 5, 8, 10 years, it tends to get more and more corrupt, and then they're going to throw in a conservative. And I don't have huge high hopes for Pierre, but And I'm not saying he's going to win or anything because we had Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Shear, and there's that Toronto um, domination, like in Quebec, I guess, to some extent, in terms of
Yeah.
making changes. But um, that's going to be part of it. I'm not putting all my eggs, like, obviously, in one basket with that. And then the provincial component, and then live your own life, do what you can. Because a lot of times when you don't think about politics and you're like taking a walk or gardening in your yard, there's really no big problems. Hopefully, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the more you immerse yourself, if it's like 24/7, you can be very worried and depressed about it all. But
Yeah.
a lot of things that we worry about are not necessarily happening at this point in time.
Yeah.
Like you can be pretty good right now in terms of your life, and so I try. I'm not perfect, but having that balance of other things, and
Yeah.
you know,
Oh yeah,
I'll,
I definitely agree that, and I tell myself that every day is, and well, not every day, but on a regular basis, I do a little reflection on the fact that there's some terrible things that are lurking just around the corner for sure. But once again, I keep telling myself is they're the kind of you not only are the people now have become so used to influence and controlling cultures and populations with with their mind rather than brute force, that now there's not a whole lot left even on the other side of things in terms of people, although I will say the kind of people who are more freedom oriented, and you think about the kind of upbringing or the kind of people that they are, and then you consider the kind of people who are the authoritarians today, if you look at them, it's pretty good odds. Like you don't have the big strong man. Like there isn't a strong man in any of the Western countries of the historical type, right? And not just strong men, but surrounded by other very strong. And we're talking, good rhetoric skills. Lots of people that can propagandize you, but in terms of might, nah, they're quite lacking. They actually rely on the population being so ill informed. Like that's the key factor. And once again, taken into account, so there's that in the positive side, but then also the fact that a little thing that's really easy, and you might want to try it yourself. Think about someone else told me. I wish I could give credit to whoever it was. I can't think right now who said it, and I kind of adopted it. Is just 200 or 300 years ago, you live today. Today, we live basically better off, right, than what a king could have only hoped to have dreamed to be living at least the kind of things that are afforded to, like, we can have food at our disposal, right? You don't have to hunt and forage, right? We got indoor plumbing. I mean, we got more things than you can shake a stick at. Actually, a lot of times I think that's kind of counter to what we should be doing because we have too many distractions, right? So I could go down a rabbit hole on that one, but at the very least, like I say, we live in a time frame where there's definitely threats at the door, but there's just so much positivity, and the fact that we live in a time where no time in history, the only other time in history where you could get information out to the masses that was not possible prior to that was the invention of the Gutenberg press. But even then, even after the invention of the Gutenberg press, it's not like everybody had automatic instant access to the breadth of all the knowledge that was written in all those great books. But in today's world, whether you're a wealthy upper middle class type of person and wants to have big long uh, long lines of books on your fancy hardwood bookshelves, right? Or you're someone that's maybe on the lower end of the social economic scale, like myself, even you can buy some of the cheaper versions on Amazon. Or if you're really down and out, you can always find stuff online in PDF form that you can get for basically free, basically the cost of your connection. So, like I say, I know the barbarians are at the door, so to speak, right? But I got to tell you, there's no time in human history where we didn't have such an opportunity as we do today. And I just, like I say, whether it's out of self-preservation, I think people right now, the reason why people are kind of sitting back and even it frustrating me and probably frustrating yourselves, like, why aren't more people acting? Is, well, their personal situation is so good, even with all of that externality and those threats, they're doing so good. It's just not worth taking the risk. But like I say, the time's going to come. And because we have the ability for people to learn all this stuff in real time, see what's actually unfolding in real time, at least you have a much better chance that when things do start to get even more sour and go even more south than they are, that I think most of us, even the most unconnected or ill-equipped economically among us, are in a much better position than people were, just a few hundred years ago, when it was literally like you just have men against men, right? Armed with swords and knives, just going out and brutally killing. Like I say, we do have the potential in this age of information. Not to say that it's 100% going to work out. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have enough hope and like I say, not necessarily faith per se, because it is grounded in my objective mind. I'm not just blindly hoping of something. I actually, based on all the things that I've observed over the last 10, 12 years, I do see that there's very, very real potential for things to get much, much better. But once again, I also am wise enough to recognize that they can get much worse. How much worse they can get, once again, and it could be much worse than what I even expect. But that's not what I'm going to sit and ponder on a daily basis, because if you do that, that will definitely beat you down. And then if I did that, and if you do that, well, we're of no help to ourselves. We're of no help to people that we're surrounding ourselves with, and we're sure as shit not going to be help to anyone that's trying to learn this stuff for themselves. So I do my best, and I definitely recommend for yourself, I'm sure you do, spend a lot of your time, as much as I do spend a fair amount of time online. I spend a lot of time with my family, and I have great experiences with my family, my love life, and friends, and in my community. And I enjoy I got a street strip car that I race with. And I do fill up enough time in the rest of my life that I'm not constantly inundated with this stuff. I actually took, what was it, a year or two ago, I took like months off, and I tell you, I enjoyed that. So don't allow yourself to get too overwhelmed. I will definitely say that. Take the time you need for your own mental health, because it can be rough if you allow this stuff too far in your head for too long.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, it's a good message. Like, another positive thing that happened was the more abuse you get, you eventually don't care what any, like, I grew up, I'm a nice guy, introvert, really caring what people, I mean, wanting people to like me and sort of people being friendly with everyone and all that. And I'm still like that, but basically there's been a lot of, like when Bonnie ran, my wife, and other scenarios where, yeah, you got thicker skin now, like where I used to be hesitant to say certain things. And now, because the left has been so abusive with calling everyone, Nazi and all these other things, racist, etc. In my mind, at least, it's almost lost its any of its impact anymore. So there's at least a group of people. He's kind of brought out a strength and a determination, like keep your eye on the ball and don't shy away from. And I'm not working. I don't, and I wouldn't, like. There's a lot of systems, like you said, being set up in jobs and companies that aren't going to cave. And so if you have to get another job or whatever, you end up working for yourself and getting a source of income, so that they can't go after that aspect where you're afraid to say anything because you don't want to lose your job or whatever. So a lot of the negativity and the craziness has brought out a strength, in a resilience that I wasn't exposed to. Like, you kind of need to get exposed to it to get used to it, and to get in my mind, unless you're naturally not, unless you're naturally like that. But the past few years have really, I've gotten to the point where these are my beliefs. I'm confident in those, and I'm not afraid to say them. And if, I can associate with generally people that agree with that. And if there's people that are vehemently opposed to it and can't deal with different opinions, and that's great. But I really appreciate, over the years, what you've done here, and that you're reaching out to people like me and Mark and other that you've interviewed, and now Dennis Pratt and everything. I look forward to seeing that.
Right.
So thanks so much. I really enjoyed chatting with you. I feel like
Yeah.
I know you like deeply already. Like I'm just waiting.
Right. Right on. Well, that's just like I said. That's just me in a nutshell. Wouldn't matter if the camera was on or off. And you could ask my wife and my kids. It's just what I do. And I literally sometimes have to remind myself, okay, because I tend to, as you can see, I could ramble on, but to me, I just look at it as it's interesting, it's engaging. I find that there were times in my life when I was younger, in my teen years and stuff, before I discovered, more about, like having a family and some of the better things is I kind of started getting a little bit hedonistic in terms of my lifestyle. And I feel this stuff now, I'm it's not religious by any, but I do feel like it does give me, a sense of meaning. Well, in addition to my family, of course, but it also gives me, a sense of meaning and purpose that I'm doing something that is, once again, I'll admit it's even somewhat selfish because the reason why I want the world to be free is because I want to be free and I want my kids and the people I care about to be free. But that's the beautiful thing. Just like with free market interactions, it's not a zero sum game. The more freedom there is in the world, that's applicable to everybody, right? So to me, that's just a net positive. Like I say, if I want, a chocolate bar and you want $1 and we make that exchange, we walk away happy. Well, it's the same with freedom. If I agree that I'm not going to use force or coercion or theft against you and you do the same thing, well, that's like I say, we don't have to necessarily be hanging out every day, but at the very least, if there's someone that your neighbor is that way, you don't have to be constantly looking over your shoulder all the time. You don't have to be,
Right.
putting extra cameras everywhere because you're worried that. So yeah, the more people that respect each other's autonomy, their sovereignty, and their freedom, right, their individual rights, the better world we end up in. And like I say, that extrapolates out to everybody. It starts at local for me and for you, but everyone else gets the benefit from that as well. So I'm gonna like for me personally, I'm just gonna keep doing this for as long as as humanly possible because, like I say, I feel that there's a need for it. I guess in a position where I can do it. I've been doing it long enough. I'm getting a little bit better at it, and why not, right? Why would I leave that off the table? I would feel that's where I would actually feel really selfish is if I had the ability to help myself and others at the same time, and I refuse to do it. So I'll keep doing it. I'm glad people like you will do it. I'm glad people like Mark and Dennis and all these other beautiful people that I've met over the years that are doing it. And I guarantee you that this stuff is paying off. The dividends are coming in, right? The yields are increasing slightly. It's not, we're not getting massive bonuses like some of these banksters, but it will. Like I say, you plant the seeds now, and I truly believe in, like I say, it's my own anecdotal experience, but I've seen the people I've talked to over the years, how and especially after COVID, like that gave me a huge amount of credibility among my peers because I was one in a very outlier in terms of everyone else, right? That was going along with the narrative. But of course, I didn't use it as a means to poke them in the eye over. I didn't do the whole "I told you so." But once again, they realized today that this is someone that obviously took the time out to be properly informed, and maybe that'll be something he'll do going forward. And maybe it's someone I can trust if I want to talk about these other issues. So, like I say, I'm constantly planting the seeds, and I definitely entice you to do it any chance you can get, and don't even think that you have to step outside your comfort zone on a daily basis. But I would say for me personally, I think we're good is to at least push your boundaries a little bit more every once in a while just to see how refreshing that for me it's been rewarding actually because I for years before I started doing this I didn't like even get a picture taken. I couldn't stand to get my picture taken. Now I'm on the freaking camera like all the time, and it was the first bunch. When I look back now, I won't look back at any of my early stuff. I was like
Yeah.
cringe, right? But I just I felt a desire, a need to do it, and like I say, I don't even feel like I'm doing it altruistically. I feel like I'm definitely gaining something from it. So like I say, it's not a zero sum game. It's a benefit for me and maybe anyone else that gets a chance to listen to it. And like I say, I'm going to tie this up now, Will, but I really appreciate you coming on the show. And if you ever do want to reach out again, because obviously if you're here in New Brunswick, you're definitely someone I'm going to want to have more contact with, because we have to kind of put out our grassroots here in this province and see what we can do. And like I say, anytime you want to reach out to me, you got my information on Twitter, and we'll probably, even if you want, at some point in time, we'll even maybe do some exchanging of phone numbers if you just want to call maybe on the personal level or something.
Yeah, for sure.
But I really appreciate you having this live stream with me, and we'll definitely talk again, man.
Yeah, sounds good. You got a great setup, your quality, your mics and your cameras, and doing live is definitely different and more stressful, more involved than just a recorded video. So I appreciate that effort, and appreciate the comments. We'll definitely keep in touch. Thanks again for everything you've done and reaching out. And I look forward to the Dennis Pratt and other videos you're going to be doing coming up.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, so for you, or sorry, go ahead.
Take care, Bennett. Yeah, it was just...
Okay, yeah, and I'm just letting everyone else there know. So for you and anyone else, it's going to be Friday at 11 o'clock Atlantic time, 10 o'clock Eastern time. I'm going to be having a chat with Dennis Pratt from the Free State Project. So you have yourself a great night there, Will. And like I say, we'll talk again soon, man.
Thanks, Bennett. Great chatting with you. See you later.
Have a good one. This is Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.